most valuable skill that you can learn as a finder. We think of transitioning to, maintaining, and deepening in fundamental well-being as a battle for resources between competing parts of your brain. Prior to becoming a finder, you developed habits that created and supported your former sense of self and its way of experiencing the world. These habits are enshrined in your brain in many ways. For example, in the form of thicker versus thinner regions, more or fewer connections within and between areas, and so on. The areas, connections, etc. within your brain that were created to support your pre-finder way of being in the world were most likely established for many years and probably had a lot of support from you in the past. In turn, they supported you by keeping things heading in your old, familiar direction. Every action and experience has communicated what you want your brain to do over your lifetime and built the capacity for you to experience it. At the same time as that infrastructure of support was built up in the brain by those actions and experiences, your brain became increasingly locked in and limited in terms of what it allowed you to experience. It's likely that your brain feels like it does this in symbiosis with you, that it helps and supports you in experiencing life how you want to, as best it knew how to do. This has been true for both the best of times and the worst of times in your life, including how it responded to trauma. The transition to fundamental well-being involves a new way of experiencing life, and in many ways, a new sense of self that goes along with that. One that is very different from the way of experiencing life that comes before it. When you were trying to reach fundamental well-being, for a while you probably noticed the tendency of your brain to want to keep you locked into your old or normal experience of self. That might have been quite frustrating, but the brain just thought it was doing what you asked it to do. Even if you spent some of your time meditating or consuming media about fundamental well-being or whatever, the reality is that up until your transition to being a finder, you probably spent nearly every other moment of your life communicating to your brain via your actions that you wanted it to support the sense of self you had previously been building up over the course of your entire lifetime. One of the most important things you need to do to successfully deepen into fundamental well-being is find ways to communicate to the brain in its own language. The primary language of the brain is the language of experience. It might seem to you that the brain exists in large part to hold your intellect, but it's actually far more rooted in experience. It's incredibly important to put and hold your attention on the experience you want to have. That's by far the best way to let your brain know what you want more of. By putting your attention on an experience, you're communicating in the brain's language. You're telling it, this is the type of experience that I want to have occur more often. In this case, it means sinking as deeply as you can into your experience of fundamental well-being. While any sinking in is good sinking in, note that I say as deeply as you can. Let's talk more about how to do that. It's important to note that you have to be careful about how you do this. If you imagine the feeling you get when you're immersed in a very pleasurable experience, such as taking a warm bath, you'll get what I mean by this phrase. While in the bath, there's a way that you can just let go and sink into and become immersed in the pleasure of the experience. You're relaxed, but still attending to the experience. Your attention is definitely on it, but there's a quality to that attention, an appreciative, sinking in kind of quality to it. That's exactly what you'll most likely find is called for here. What happens if you put another type of attention on the bath? For example, what if you bring an analytical form of attention to it? It's not as pleasurable, is it? It's a totally different kind of experience. You can feel the difference right now in your own imagination, can't you? In one example, you're sinking in and immersing yourself in the experience and the pleasure it gives you. In another, you're paying attention to it, analyzing it, and so on. But the result is that you are mostly distancing yourself from the actual experience itself. You're still in the bath, feeling it to some extent, but what you're actually doing is making a mental object out of it that's increasingly separating you from the actual lived experience, rather than immersing yourself experientially in the moment-to-moment richness of it. Far too many people do the latter when trying to sink into fundamental well-being, and the same thing happens. Instead of communicating to their brain that more of the experience is desired, they communicate that the experience is to be distanced from, analyzed, objectified in the mind, and understood as mentally represented experience, not had as a deeply lived experience. This only makes it harder to go deeper, and it's one of the reasons that many finders accidentally get stuck in more shallow forms of fundamental well-being than they want to. It's the opposite of what you want to do. Instead, you want to make sure that you're putting attention on it in the right way so that the new connections in your brain are formed and strengthened, and the old ones begin to wither. Doing it in this best practice kind of way makes your brain a willing partner in the process rather than an accidental adversary, while all the while, it is still thinking that it's helping you. The more details about what to look for can be found on the next page. So you can go there and get this fleshed out for you more in terms of what you're actually looking for in your experiences and things like that. Those are always questions that we get. I'll see you there.